The ritual. Ethan shivered, pulling his threadbare robe tighter around him. The old fraternity house was a labyrinth of drafty corridors and echoing halls, a far cry from the brochure's picture-perfect depiction. Tonight was the night of the ritual, the final step to becoming a true brother of Delta Epsilon. He wasn't nervous, not exactly. A healthy dose of apprehension mixed with a thrill of the unknown churned in his stomach. The whispers surrounding the ritual were vague, a mix of bravado and veiled fear. No one spoke of the details, only the transformation it would bring. A deep, guttural chant echoed from a room at the end of the hall. Goosebumps prickled Ethan's skin. He followed the sound, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He pushed open the oaken door, revealing a dimly lit room. In the center, an intricate pentagram was drawn on the dusty floor, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. Around it, his fellow pledges stood in a circle, faces illuminated by flickering candlelight. At the head of the circle stood the fraternity president, Mr. Thorne, a man shrouded in mystery and whispers of dark pasts. His voice, hoarse and ancient, droned on in a language Ethan didn't recognize. The air crackled with an unseen energy, making Ethan's hair stand on end. Suddenly, Mr. Thorne stopped chanting. He turned towards a large, ornately carved chest positioned in the corner of the room. With a flourish, he threw open the lid. Ethan's breath hitched. Inside lay a skull, its empty sockets staring back at him with an unnerving intensity. Mr. Thorne chanted a single word, his voice booming through the room. The room erupted in chaos. A wave of nausea washed over Ethan as the air grew thick with a fetid stench. The pentagram pulsed with an unholy light, the air crackling and buzzing with raw energy. One by one, his fellow pledges doubled over, screams ripping from their throats. Black veins snaked across their skin, their eyes turning a milky white. An unearthly power thrummed in the air, a dark current sucking the life from the room. Panic seized Ethan. This wasn't some hazing ritual. It was something far more sinister. He stumbled back, desperate to flee the room, to escape this malevolent force. But it was too late. A cold hand clamped onto his shoulder, pinning him in place. Mr. Thorne's face loomed over him, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "There's no escape, brother," Mr. Thorne rasped, his voice a chilling whisper. "You are one of us now." The skull in the chest levitated, its empty sockets boring into Ethan's soul. A wave of unimaginable power slammed into him, tearing apart his very being. He screamed, but the sound died in his throat, lost in the cacophony of the ritual. As the room pulsed with dark energy, Ethan felt his own life force draining away. The last thing he saw was Mr. Thorne's triumphant grin, a harbinger of the darkness that had taken root within the fraternity house, the prank gone wrong. Mark stumbled through the abandoned warehouse, the air thick with dust and the metallic tang of blood. His fraternity brothers, shadows in the flickering darkness, laughed behind him. They'd blindfolded him, claiming a test of courage. Now, the thrill of hazing had morphed into a gnawing fear. "All right, Marky Mark," a voice slurred. "Find the Holy Grail." Mark felt a cold metal object thrust into his hand. It was a rusty key. The laughter grew louder, echoing eerily in the vast space. He shuffled forward, hands outstretched, praying he wouldn't bump into anything sharp. Suddenly, his foot caught on something, sending him sprawling. The blindfold slipped, revealing a horrifying sight. A young woman lay sprawled on the concrete floor, her clothes torn, a crimson stain blooming on her chest. His scream died in his throat. This wasn't part of the prank. Panic seized him. He scrambled back, the key clattering to the floor. His eyes darted around, searching for his brothers, but the shadows seemed to swallow him whole. A chilling voice slithered from behind him. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Mark whipped around, his blood turning to ice. A tall figure emerged from the gloom, a monstrous grin plastered across his face. He wore a clown mask, the painted smile mocking Mark's terror. "Party's over, kid," the clown rasped, his voice dripping with amusement. Mark wanted to scream, to run, but his body refused to obey. The clown advanced, a glint of metal catching the dim light. A knife. "Let's play a game," the clown cackled, his voice devoid of humor. Mark's mind raced. This wasn't a fraternity brother gone too far. This was something different. Something monstrous. He backed away, searching for an escape. "See, here's the fun part," the clown continued, circling him. "You find the key, you unlock the door, and maybe, just maybe, you get out alive." He gestured towards a heavy metal door at the far end of the warehouse. Mark's gaze darted between the door, offering a sliver of hope and the sadistic grin of the clown. He lunged for the key, adrenaline coursing through his veins. The clown lunged too, a guttural roar escaping his lips. They scrambled on the dusty floor, a twisted game of life and death. Mark snatched the key, his fingers scraping against cold metal. He scrambled towards the door, a desperate prayer forming in his mind. The clown was close behind, his heavy footsteps echoing like a death knell. Mark fumbled with the lock, his heart pounding against his ribs. The key turned with a satisfying click. He flung the door open, the night air a welcome relief on his burning skin. He didn't hesitate. He bolted into the darkness, the chilling laughter of the clown fading behind him. He didn't care where he was going, only that he was running away from the nightmare that unfolded within the warehouse walls. He ran until his lungs burned, until exhaustion forced him to stumble to a stop. He collapsed beneath a lone streetlight, gasping for breath. Dawn was approaching, painting the sky with a pale light. He looked around, the familiar street a beacon of normalcy. Yet, the memory of the warehouse, the lifeless body, and the sadistic grin of the clown lingered, a chilling reminder that the night's events were no prank, the lost pledge. Michael clutched the damp sand beneath him, gasping for air. His blindfold was a suffocating entity, the world reduced to panicked breaths and the pounding of his heart. He'd been running for what felt like hours, the woods a maze of unseen obstacles. The brothers of Sigma Phi had assured him this was just a test, a chance to prove his loyalty. Now, fear had stripped away any pretense. He'd stumbled upon an abandoned dock hours ago, the rickety planks groaning under his weight. A voice, gruff and unfamiliar, had grabbed him before he could board a rusted old boat. Michael had bolted, the laughter of his supposed brothers echoing behind him until exhaustion had claimed him. The sound of rushing water sent a jolt of terror. He crawled towards it, the edge of a cliff meeting his trembling hand. Below, waves crashed against jagged rocks, a churning maw promising oblivion. This wasn't part of the plan. A choked sob escaped him. "Lost, are we?" A cold voice slithered into his ear. Michael whipped around, heart hammering against his ribs. A tall figure stood in the darkness, obscured by the oppressive night. He wore a long coat, the hood hiding his face. "Who are you?" Michael rasped, voice hoarse. "Just someone who can help you," the figure rasped back. "But help comes at a price, doesn't it?" Michael's mind raced. This stranger was dangerous, but was he more dangerous than the brothers waiting for him back at the house? "Help me," he choked out. "Please." The figure chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Let's see if you're worthy." He extended a hand, the moonlight glinting off a glinting blade strapped to his forearm. "Follow me." Desperation outweighed fear. Michael took the offered hand, a cold, clammy grip that sent shivers down his spine. They descended a narrow, overgrown path that snaked down the cliff face. The air grew thick and humid, the forest morphing into a tangled swamp. Strange bioluminescent fungi cast an eerie glow, illuminating gnarled trees and the occasional scurrying form. After what seemed like an eternity, they reached a clearing. A crude wooden hut stood in the center, smoke curling lazily from its chimney. The figure led Michael inside, the flickering firelight revealing a room cluttered with animal bones and strange herbs hanging from the ceiling. An old woman sat hunched over a cauldron, stirring its bubbling contents. Her face was a network of wrinkles, and her eyes, milky white, seemed to pierce through Michael. "He seeks your aid, mother," the figure rasped. The woman cackled, a sound like dry leaves rustling. "Lost, are you, seeking escape from those who play a cruel game?" Michael could only nod, his throat constricted with fear. "Escape comes at a price," the woman croaked, her voice a rasp. "Are you willing to pay it?" Michael didn't understand, but a desperate hope flickered within him. "Anything," he whispered. The old woman grinned, revealing a mouthful of blackened teeth. "Then drink." She thrust a steaming mug towards him. The pungent odor that filled his nose made him recoil, but the woman's gaze held him captive. Hesitantly, he brought the mug to his lips. The liquid burned his throat, tasting of something unnatural, of decay and earth. He collapsed onto the rough floor, his vision blurring. The woman and the figure loomed over him, their forms distorted like figures in a nightmare. Laughter filled the room, a chilling chorus that echoed in Michael's fading consciousness. He awoke to the harsh light of morning, disoriented and shivering. The hut was empty, the fire cold ash. Panic surged through him as he realized he was alone, stranded in this desolate swamp. He stumbled out of the hut, the world spinning. With a renewed sense of urgency, he began to fight his way back towards the cliff face. Hours melted into an agonizing blur. Finally, he reached the top, collapsing onto the familiar sand. He lay there, gasping for air, the rising sun painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink. In the distance, he saw a figure approaching, a familiar blue and white fraternity shirt, a beacon of hope. Relief flooded him, tears stinging his eyes. "There you are, Michael," a voice boomed. "We were worried sick." Michael's elation curdled into a cold dread. As the figure drew closer, he saw the face beneath the friendly smile. It wasn't one of the brothers he recognized. It was the stranger from the night, his face devoid of the previous darkness, replaced by a mask of concern. A horrifying realization dawned on Michael.